Mr. Chairman.
Yes, sir.
Everybody in this room that are members of Congress were elected to do exactly what this legislation calls for some working group to do. It may come as no surprise to you that there are those of us that are in Congress that were not happy with any committee of Congress being divided, and whether Mr. Van Hollen or anybody else was on it. I feel my responsibilities to my constituency and to America of equal weight to any member that is a member of any one of these so-called separate committees. Now, I awakened this morning and came here, and the first thing that came to me before I came to the Capitol early this morning was the facts from one of my staff from something called BuzzFeed. And BuzzFeed was mindful of what you all were getting ready to do before you went to your conference. I had absolutely no idea. I serve on the Rules Committee, as do all of the members that are here, and I had no idea we would be discussing anything like this today. Eric Cantor, the majority leader, discharging his responsibilities, had put out a voting schedule that called for us to vote on other matters. Of course, this is the Rules Committee. You can bring up anything that you want at any given time under the martial law, under the same day. But then I heard you, Mr. Chairman, just say to Mr. McGovern that this is occurring, meaning this establishment of a bicameral working group, because some person, unidentified evidently, otherwise I would hope that you would call that person's name, said that the president would let the nation default. And so therefore, this is the position that you're taking because of some anonymous somebody saying something about the president? Is that what you're doing here?
I appreciate the gentleman asking me a question. In fact, the Speaker of the House has been engaged in negotiations, went last week, I believe, to the White House, and the President indicated that, thank you for coming down here, he's not interested in negotiating. So it simply reinforced a continued effort that we believe from the White House, so we're trying to work around that. We're trying to work with members.
With all due respect, Mr. Chairman, reclaiming my time just to put yet an additional question to you, and then I will yield to the ranking member for a question. But that's not what I asked you. What you just said was that someone said that the president would allow us to default on our debt. And your comment was, based on that, that's why you are doing what we are doing here. And I ask you, is that true? Is that why you're doing this? And then you responded just then by saying that someone went to the White House a week ago and the president, and I gather that's the meeting that the president called for, and the president said, and doubtless it's true, that he was not going to negotiate away the debt ceiling. So what is it? I mean, why are you bringing this useless piece of legislation that obviously you would know is not going anywhere? Is it based on some anonymous statement?
Gentleman, yield.
Yes, of course.
I do appreciate the gentleman. I do understand, I believe, that the gentleman is opposed to this. With that said, we have brought numerous pieces of legislation to the floor in response to not only the CR, but also how we deal with the government shutdown. And I'm well aware that there are things that the gentleman agrees with and some that he has agreed with them and been against them. We believe that what we're trying to do is to say to House members and Senate members, we think that outside of the leadership of both of these organizations and the President, we ought to put our best thinkers. We didn't try and say who would be on the committee. We simply said it'd be an equal number and that they have a mission. They've got to meet no later than 1 day after they're appointed. They've got to be appointed within 1 day.
I get
Let's get to work. That's what we're trying to say.
Yeah, all right. Let me yield to Ms. Slaughter for a question.
I appreciate you're doing that because what you're saying here is very important. As I heard what the chairman said, was that the president had stated that he would prefer default. Is that correct, what you said?
No, ma'am. I said that the senior advisor said that the president would sooner default than to engage in the negotiation. We can get the quote for you. I think it's available by request. I'd never heard of this other buzz
Well,
group.
I certainly want to see it. I would think that would be such big news. Everybody would.
Be very
The president is not going to do any such thing.
By the way, the Speaker of the House.
That the faith and credit, full faith and credit of the United States is so important to him that he will not negotiate over it.
If the gentleman would allow me, the
Yes.
Speaker of the House yesterday went on the floor and acknowledged exactly the characterization that is more correct, by the way the Speaker said it when he spoke yesterday publicly on the floor of the House of Representatives, and that is what told us that we need to go a different route and try and work with members.
We've heard a lot of characterizations about people that have been totally untrue, and I'd be careful about that. But here's what I interrupted Mr. Hastings to say. We understand that there's now a new bill that's going to be added to the schedule today on these many CRs on the FAA, which has had absolutely no committee action again. We have not seen this bill. We know absolutely nothing about it. I'm assuming that you'll have to recess now because I don't think it's here, as far as I know. But I will tell you that we object most strenuously to the way that this government is being run. That what you're saying, and not only is that nearly half of the House of Representatives not worthy of being in a committee so that they can have some input on what's being done, but the Rules Committee, which is supposed to be the final spot before a piece of legislation goes to the floor, have no idea what's happening until we come up here and get to see it. We saw this thing 30 minutes ago. And I want to really ask you, is that what we're going to do today, and are there any more coming?
Yes, ma'am, and thank you very much.
There are more coming.
And thank you very much for the gentlewoman and the gentleman. In fact, we will continue to have pieces of legislation that will be added up to and including some that will be tomorrow, some will be later, and that do address the needs of the business. And we do agree with you. We don't agree with the way the government's being run either.
The needs of the business are to open up the United States government. This is such a farce. I have to tell you the truth. I can't sit here and act as though I'm giving this credence. The truth is, all we have to do is open up the government, put the people back to work. This strange dance we're going through here of legislation is just not worthy of the United States government. And I thank you very much for yielding.
And I thank the chairman as well. But now let me give the chairman and the members some new news. As of 11:30 this morning, the White House issued this statement. Late this morning, the President telephoned Speaker John Boehner from the Oval Office and repeated what he told him when they met at the White House last week. The President is willing to negotiate with Republicans after the threat of government shutdown and default have been removed over policies that Republicans think would strengthen the country. The President also repeated his willingness to negotiate on priorities that he has identified, including policies that expand economic opportunity, support private sector job creation, enhance the competitiveness of American business, and strengthen the Affordable Care Act and continue to reduce the nation's deficit. The President urged the Speaker to hold a vote in the House of Representatives on the Senate-passed measure that would reopen the federal government immediately. Citing the Senate's intention to pass a clean year-long extension of the debt limit this week, the President also pressed the Speaker to allow a timely up or down vote in the House to raise the debt limit with no ideological strings attached. He noted that only Congress has the authority to raise the debt limit, and failure to do so would have grave consequences for middle-class families and the American economy as a whole. That's the latest statement from the President that is in complete refutation of any anonymous statements that any staff person may have said, and is pretty clear. But, Mr. Chairman, I want to come back to you and ask you again another question. Can you, Speaker Boehner, for whom I have great respect, guarantee that if this commission or working group, as it's called in the proposed legislation, were to meet and bring out findings that you and or the Speaker more specifically can guarantee that his Tea Party members will support those recommendations?
I thank the gentleman and for yielding, and I would like to say, and the gentleman, Mr. Boehner, does recognize your friendship and support of representing your district, and is delighted that you're here on the Rules Committee with us. And that is an outstanding question. What I would say to the gentleman is that as the American people hear the debate that takes place between these members who would be there. We're hoping that the American people really engage on this issue, an idea that would have great leverage with all of our members, and it would be, I think, beneficial. And as best I can tell you, right, as I look at the gentlewoman from New York, I think the American people do need to see how we're going to do this, and would become engaged behind common sense ideas. And I appreciate the gentleman for asking.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have additional questions. And one of them is in reading and rereading the legislation and then asking my staff to review it. It says absolutely nothing about how much this will cost. Now, these committees don't just come into existence all of a sudden and don't cost anything. So since you've left that out, I would hope before we report out the rule, and normally I'm in agreement with reporting out the rule most immediately, but normally it isn't good enough in these times. At least we ought to have some idea about how much it will cost the taxpayers to establish such a commission and to have it render its majority and minority reports. Does the chairman have an answer to that question?
In fact, I do, and I appreciate the gentleman deferring to me. The working group is what this is called. It is, in fact, a working group. It is not a committee. It is a working group, bicameral, bipartisan, men, women.
How much does it cost?
Yeah, I appreciate the gentleman, and so we have not gone and calculated that. I would say to the gentleman, I appreciate the question, and we think this working group can get done and get the work and would be done.
Man, you sure do have a strange way of evading questions.
You know what? If I had an answer, I'd give it to you.
Well, I'm delighted to know that you don't have an answer, and that's what should be in this legislation. All of the other legislation that created committees created the financing of those committees or working groups or whatever you want to call them. But the simple fact is this one does not, and I will offer an amendment to the rule that will allow that we do at least establish something, if nothing more than to say that each member's member representational allowance, and we can do that for the House, but we can't do it for the Senate. And somehow or another, we're off the track here altogether. But I don't understand perpetuating legislation and allowing for a working group to be established, and if they don't have good working staff, as some of the others have had, and they have produced fine products that went absolutely nowhere in this Congress. And I'd range all the way back to good friends of mine that did the Concord Coalition long before we get to where we are. Now, apparently your staffer wants to have me say something that you need to say. So let me yield to you.
Well, I appreciate it, gentlemen, but what I wanted to reply back is, if we use as a standard the committee, which was for the purpose of trying to cut a deal of long-term debt, we did give them a designation. We gave them a time frame. We told them, by and large, what to do, what the rules of the game
The super committee you're talking about now.
I am. We are not trying to do that at all. We're trying to establish a working group and come up with recommendations who would be able to effectively turn this around. We're not talking about, I appreciate this. In fact, we're trying to get a resolution of some ideas to help us work better together.
I think I may have a solution. At the Budget Committee that has already been constituted, that staff are already been, they have the salaries are in place. I'm sure Mr. Van Hollen would not object to having a conference committee be televised so the American people could have the discussion that you want, and then we don't have to worry about adding any more money. We don't need to reinvent the wheel. We already have the wheel here.
Well, first off, I thank the gentleman very much, but what you've done here in this legislation that you propose, as Mr. Van Hollen has wisely pointed out, that you say that the working group's charge is, number one, overall levels of discretionary spending, including for the fiscal year ending on September 30, 2014. It's more like 19, since it seems like we're going back to previous centuries with all of this stuff. But the simple fact of the matter is something that's revenue neutral, and that's basically what you've done. And I would ask Mr. Van Hollen, do you perceive it the same as I do, this particular language, that how it is your charge would be revenue neutral, since it would not include any potential for spending and revenue increases?
Yes, Mr. Hastings. What this says is, even though the title says deficit reduction, it would only allow this group to pursue one kind of deficit reduction. You would not be allowed to both do targeted cuts, which we should do, and targeted cuts and cuts to tax breaks. And again, we talked about big oil company subsidies. You've got, big Wall Street hedge fund owners who get a much lower tax rate than the ordinary Americans. Under this legislation, the way it's drawn, you couldn't reduce the deficit by 1 penny by closing some of those tax breaks.
Absolutely. And in this nation, 1% of the people in this country have hijacked the middle class, quite frankly, and that's, I believe, what my colleagues on the Democrat side are trying to do, and that is increase the middle class and widen it so that this nation can go forward. But this legislation, I predict for you, I don't even imagine that Harry Reid is going to allow it to even reach the pile at his desk. But let me borrow from Ezra Klein, a favorite of mine. He writes today, "Fool me with a budget commission once, shame on you. Fool me 8 times, and I think it's important for the people to know that he lists the partial list of bipartisan budget negotiations we've had since 2010. The Simpson-Bowles Commission, which people forget was the legacy of a 2010 debt ceiling increase, the Domenici-Rivlin Commission, the Cantor-Biden talks, the Obama-Boehner debt ceiling negotiations, the Gang of 6 talks, the Super Committee, the Obama fiscal cliff talks, and every last one of them went absolutely nowhere, although there are many things, and even as late as now, I would support the Simpson-Bowles Commission, and had we done it at that time, it would have made an awful lot of sense. And had we done what the senator from Vermont and his people had done with the Concord Coalition, well, things in there that I would not have agreed upon, but might put us in a better position that we're in this nation today. And all I would say is, and I ask you this, Mr. Chairman, this will be my final question, what happens if and when this commission, if it were, or working group, excuse me, if this working group fails and the next CR and debt ceiling increase needs to be passed? What happens then when this one doesn't work? I yield to the gentleman.
I thank the gentleman for his question, and the answer is that I believe what we're trying to do is to come up with an idea to empower members as opposed to the leadership route that we've been doing, where our leaders have worked together, and I think our leaders have been unable to do that. And I appreciate the gentleman not only for his thoughtful questions, but also his answers, but would say to the gentleman, this is another opportunity, and we're going to keep throwing them out, just as we have others, and hoping that sooner or later.
I thank the gentleman.
I thank the gentleman.
Borrow my time back just to say, I don't need other members to tell me how to do my job. I don't need the leadership of this Congress on either side telling me how to do my job. Every one of the 435 plus 6 or 7 of the delegates in this Congress have minds that are just as sound and solid as everybody else. All we have to do is go right down to the floor right now and put on the floor a clean CR and let the body work its will. I predicted it would pass, and you all are holding it up, and you ought to be held responsible by the American people that you continue to talk about. And I want to say something else about the American people. I don't only just represent the people in my constituency, I represent the people that didn't vote that are American people. They're deserving of our consideration, and I don't need no commission to tell me nothing, and for me to be walking around on the floor trying to ask a handful of people what it is that they're doing on a given day. If we ought to do it, then we ought to do what Mr. McGovern says. Let it be public and let everybody see what it is that we're doing. The Speaker has even said he wasn't going to participate in any more backroom negotiations with anybody. And here we are getting ready to establish something else that's going to be some kind of super committee over me and my constituency. Cut me some slack. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back his time.